Before he was a legend, George Washington was a young man in a hurry. Ambitious, proud, hungry for rank and glory in the king's army. In the wilderness of 1755, he rode with a British general named Braddock, marching in tidy red columns toward the French. Washington warned them the forest was no place for European parade ground tactics. They did not listen. The column was ambushed and slaughtered. Braddock was killed, and Washington, 23 years old, rode through the chaos trying to rally men who were already running. 2 horses were shot out from under him. 4 bullets tore through his coat. Not one touched his skin. He came out of that forest alive and changed. He had seen what happens when pride meets reality, when men fight the wrong battle the wrong way and pay for it in blood. The hungry young officer learned the lesson that would make him immortal. Courage without wisdom just gets good men killed. 20 years later, the colonies were in open rebellion, and the Continental Congress needed a commander. Washington did not campaign for it. He sat in the back of the room in his old uniform and let them come to him. When they named him, he did not celebrate. He told them plainly he feared he was not equal to it. He asked for no salary. He wrote to his wife that he would rather have stayed home at Mount Vernon than take this. That was the first thing that made him dangerous to a king. He did not hunger for the power they handed him. He took it the way a man shoulders a load he never asked for. Because someone had to, and he was the one standing there. He rode north to take command of the army that would win American independence, and what he found waiting for him was not an army at all. It was a mob. Farmers and boys. No shoes, no powder, no training, no pay. Camped in the mud across the water from the most powerful military on earth. His first victory came without a battle at all. The British held Boston, dug in, untouchable. His officers wanted to storm the city. Washington wanted the city without the slaughter. So he sent a bookseller named Henry Knox on an impossible errand. To drag the cannons captured at Fort Ticonderoga, 300 miles through the dead of winter, over frozen rivers and mountains, on sleds. It should not have been possible. Knox did it. And one quiet night, Washington's men hauled those guns up onto the heights overlooking the city. And when the British awoke, they found themselves staring down the barrels of artillery that had appeared like a miracle. There was no assault. There did not need to be one. The British boarded their ships and sailed away. Washington had taken Boston and barely fired a shot. He was already learning the shape of the whole war. The goal was not to win battles. The goal was to win. Then came New York and disaster. The British landed an army bigger than the population of most American cities, and they nearly destroyed everything Washington had. His lines broke. His men panicked and ran. And Washington did the bravest thing a proud man can do. He chose to run too. In the dark, in the fog, he ferried thousands of soldiers across the East River, boat by silent boat, slipping his whole army out from under the enemy before the sun came up. He retreated across New Jersey with the British at his heels, trading ground for time. Refusing the open battle his officers begged him to fight. They called him timid. They were wrong. Once, his pride got the better of him. He held a fort he should have abandoned and lost nearly 3,000 men in a single day. He never forgot it. It taught him the hardest discipline of all, that the courage to fight is common, but the courage not to fight, when not fighting is right, is rare. As long as the army lived, the revolution lived. So he kept it alive. By the winter of 1776, the cause was dying. Enlistments were days from running out. The men were ready to go home. Thomas Paine wrote that these were the times that try men's souls. Washington had spent a year refusing to fight the wrong battle. Now, for the first time, he chose to fight the right one. On Christmas night, in a sleeting storm, he loaded his freezing army into boats and crossed the ice-choked Delaware River. Not recklessly, precisely. He struck the garrison at Trenton at dawn, when no one believed an army that beaten could even move. It was over in under an hour. Days later, he slipped around another British force and struck again at Princeton. 2 victories, snatched from the jaws of collapse. They were not large, but they were proof of the whole philosophy of the man. Patience is not weakness. Patience is what earns you the one moment that matters, and the wisdom to recognize it when it finally comes. The next winter nearly finished what the British could not. At a place called Valley Forge, the army froze. Men marched without shoes, leaving blood in the snow. They starved. Disease moved through the huts and took 2,000 of them. Washington could have wintered in comfort. Generals do. He stayed. He lived in the cold with his men, begged a useless Congress for food that rarely came, and held the whole thing together by the sheer fact that he would not leave. His wife Martha came and sat with the dying. And in that misery, something was forged. A Prussian officer drilled the ragged men, day after frozen day, until a mob learned to move like an army. They marched into that valley a rabble. They marched out soldiers. Endurance, it turns out, is its own kind of attack. Sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is simply refuse to die, and refuse to let the people counting on him die either. Then came the hardest part of all, waiting. For years, the war ground on with no end in sight. Washington could not match the British in the field, so he beat them another way. He built a ring of spies, ordinary farmers and merchants, and a woman known only as 355, who fed him the enemy's secrets, while the redcoats never suspected. He learned to win with knowledge instead of blood, and when his moment finally came, he seized it with a magician's deception. He made the British believe he was about to attack New York. Campfires, fake orders, the whole show, and then marched his army hundreds of miles south in secret to a place called Yorktown, where he trapped the British against the sea and a French fleet. The army that simply would not die had finally cornered the empire that could never catch it. The war was won, not by a genius of the battlefield, but by a man patient enough and humble enough to lose slowly until the enemy gave up. And then George Washington did the thing that no one in history does. He gave the power back. First, when his own officers, unpaid and furious, were ready to march on Congress and make him king, he walked into their meeting and stopped the coup with a pair of spectacles. "Gentlemen," he said, "I have grown gray in your service, and now I find myself going blind." Grown men wept, and the rebellion died in that room. Then, in 1783, with the war won and the army loyal to him alone, he stood before the Congress and handed back his commission, his command, his sword, his power, and asked only to go home. Across the ocean, King George III heard that Washington meant to give it all up and return to his farm, and said, "If he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world." He did it. They called him back once to be the first president, and he served because they needed him. And then, when he could have ruled for the rest of his life, he stepped down again and went home to Mount Vernon for good. Every peaceful handoff of power in this country for 200 years began with one man who proved it could be done. He had the one thing tyrants never have. He had enough. And that, not what he was willing to seize, but what he was willing to lay down, is the measure of a strong man.